Welcome back. We are still unpacking the budget 2021-2022. We're still with George this morning. Now, George, let's look at another key aspect, and I'd like us to look at exactly that development expenditure that the government has actually gone into. And I want us to go all the way back to 2015 and try and look at exactly where we are all the way in 2021. And what you're going to notice is that it has not been incremental, George. It's been either up or down depending on where we are, which is indicative that the government has been cutting back on that expenditure where they can. And actually 2020-2021 is when they cut it to the biggest level as well, at a time when you like to think that because they're moving closer then to stepping out of office, they will increase that development expenditure so they can deliver on the Big Four agenda. But George, they are not doing that. That data is indicating different. Good. Let's go back to that public debt as well, because that's where my question is coming from. You'll actually also say that, well, that's a known story. It has been all the way skyrocketing, and this now, as we start 2021, 2022, we are at the biggest level yet, and it's bound to rise. George, do you feel then that in as much as the government wants to deliver on its promises, what is really cutting back on that is that fiscal indiscipline, is that we are borrowing more and more? But why are we not realizing the effect of this money in the economy, George?
Elijah, if you look at our debt from 2017 to date,
yes,
we've been increasing our national debt by around 1 trillion shillings every year, which is quite heavy. In 2017, we had a debt portfolio of 4.41 trillion.
Yes.
2018, 5.08. 2019, 5.81, and then 2020, 7.2 trillion, which is also debatable because IMF wants us to grade our debt differently. If we adopted what IMF wants us to do, then our debt portfolio would rise to around 9.3 trillion. I would have been happy, Elijah, if a good percentage of this debt goes towards development expenditure.
Yes.
But that is not the case. Most of our debt goes towards recurrent expenditure. Treasury has has coined a very good word to explain this. They call it budgetary support. And budgetary support, they simply say that a big percentage of this money goes towards covering our budget deficit, and a big percentage of our deficit, as we had seen earlier, goes towards recurrent expenditure. Elijah, even at an enterprise level or at an individual level, when you borrow to consume, then sooner or later you will hit a dead end where you cannot be able to pay the debts that you accumulated, and you are not able to access more debt in the market. When you reach that level, Elijah, then you must now swallow the bitter pill, and that probably is where the government is heading to. We have said this thing over and over again, but maybe the government has not taken this keenly. It is good to swallow the pill now when you still have that leverage to do it, rather than wait until we reach the point of no return where we cannot be able to move a step ahead. Remember, Elijah, that we are projecting to raise 2.03 trillion in national taxes. That is the Kenya Revenue Authority. The last financial year, we had projected to raise around 1.8 trillion. Of course, we missed that by around 200 billion. And when you miss your revenue collection budget, then that builds into your budget deficit for that financial year. How sure are we that if we miss 2020-2021 collection budget, that we are going to be able to raise the 2.03 trillion that we are projecting for 2021-2022? Most likely, Elijah, we might miss that budget as well. And if you miss that, then it plows back into your budget deficit, and therefore you have to borrow more to cover that deficit. So I think where the government is headed, Elijah, and they know these things. Remember, the president had talked about reducing the wage bill. You've seen very little going towards that direction, Elijah. Instead, our wage bill has been going up and up almost on an annual basis. So maybe the government knows what they're supposed to do, but they're afraid to do it, or they're trying to do it. Or I don't know what their thinking is towards that, because they're aware that we are not in a good place, but they're not taking measures to address some of these issues that we are putting across day to day. So as it is today, Elijah, personally, or if I were the one sitting at Treasury, then probably I would look at a budget of less than 3 trillion and just consolidate my figures, so that going forward, priority is to reduce my gross national debt for 1, 2, or 3 years, and then now get back into serious development. That is the only way that we'll be able to move in the next 2 or 3 years. But if we move at the pace or at the rate we are moving with our debt accumulation, then sooner or later we will hit a dead end, Elijah.
Pretty much. Now, George, let's cross over to the next part, therefore, on exactly how the government needs to raise this money. We do know KRA has the biggest task yet to raise 2 trillion. They've never met their target, so it's going to be looked at again on exactly what's bound to happen. But they're trying to address that through the Finance Bill 2021. Now, Ukur Yatani, through the Finance Bill 2021, sought key amendments to the Finance Bill 2020. Some of the proposals include, now let's start, finished iron and steel products to be imported at 25% excise duty to protect local manufacturers from cheaper imports. Number 2, manufacture of diapers, inputs duty free for a further 1 year. Leather and footwear products, imports at 25%. Betting excise duty to be reintroduced at 20% of the stake amount. Others include, and I'm going to go through them as well, that bread now is not VAT exempt, will attract the 16% VAT. Motorcycle assembly parts will also attract import duty as well. Now let's continue with that as well. Under furniture, you attract 35% import duty as well. That is exactly where we stand in the Finance Bill 2021. George, yes, some analysts are saying that the biggest value that you can get out of this is just 8.7 billion. Should you realize the Finance Bill 2021-2022 fully? Is that enough to support the government in trying to raise this revenue, or give KRA the extra oomph to finally reach their target?
Elijah would want to look at Finance Bill 2021 in the prism of Finance Bill 2020.
Yes.
If you look at Finance Bill 2020, the biggest theme, or if you read through it all through, then the biggest theme was trying to raise more revenue through our taxes, and that is where you realize we introduced the digital service tax. That is where we introduced excise duty on bank transactions. That is where we introduced VAT on goods that we previously were zero rated or that were exempt. And that notwithstanding, we realized, I think, a revenue from around 1.6 trillion, and we missed our budget by around 200 billion.
Yes.
Looking at the 2021 budget, finance bill, it still tries to entrench further our tax collections, of course, with a few tax breaks here and there to support a few industries like the steel industry and the diaper manufacturing industry. And I would have loved to look at this vis-a-vis the Big Four, and more specifically growth in the manufacturing sector. You don't grow manufacturing sector by taxing the way we've done. Remember, the beer manufacturers have had serious issues with the taxman over the last few years, and those are not issues that you want the private sector to have with the taxman if you are to show up manufacturing. That notwithstanding, Elijah, I want to put it that the Kenyan economy is already overtaxed. Increasing any other tax now does what we call a reverse economic effect in the economy, so that instead of increasing your collections, it reduces your economic output at the end of the day. So if you look at the finance bill 2021, the proposals that have been put across are not tangible proposals either to increase tax revenue. Of course, if they're implemented, then maybe we'll just realize 8.7 billion. That is a paltry figure if you look at our total budget at 3.66 trillion.
Yes.
And on the other hand, it doesn't give an impetus to the economy, to grow the economy, and especially the private sector. Coming out of, or even not even coming out, we're still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And during such times, governments are supposed to hold the private sector's hands so that they can go through this pandemic and come out the other side and still be operational. This is a time that maybe I would have expected more tax breaks to the private sector, more cash injections into the private sector, so that at least they can weather this season and come out of it without closing down or without downsizing their workforce. Because when you do that, Elijah, one of our biggest tax revenue head is pay as you earn, and pay as you earn you only collect from individuals who are actively employed. You don't collect pay as you earn from those who are not actively employed. And if private sector sheds off its employees, then you're not able to collect pay as you earn. So I think the Finance Bill 2021 wanted to, their biggest theme again was to increase the tax collections, but they might not realize even the 8.7 billion, much as it's paltry figure, they might not even realize that from what they are proposing, and it doesn't protect what we already have.
Yes.
In this scenario, I think the most important thing is to protect what you already have, so that as you go out of this depression, at least you have a foothold, you have a foundation to start from, so that you build it to the next level in the economy, Elijah.
Pretty much. Now, George, somebody's going to ask you as well. Now, Ukur Yatani is seeking powers in the Finance Bill 2021 to have an effect on the VAT without necessarily going to the House for approval. How important is that for the government, especially at a time when collections have dwindled so much because of the COVID-19 pandemic, George? And is VAT going to be the magic bullet for KRA realizing their revenue targets they set?
Elijah, that is a very risky proposal.
Yes.
Remember, VAT is one of the tax sets that has been quote unquote misused by Treasury, because whenever Treasury or the taxman falls short of realizing its budget estimates, then they would want to increase VAT, and sometimes they increase VAT on the most essential of products. One of them being fuel.
Yes.
That has increased over the last few months. So by Treasury seeking to get authority to increase VAT without referring back to Parliament is very risky and very detrimental to the economy. Because what Treasury can wake up one day and do is they would wake up one day and just increase, say, VAT on petroleum products to 18%, and there's nothing you will do. And if you were to do that, then almost all essential products in the economy will increase. So I think that is not the direction we want to to go. And sometimes when you do some of these things, Elijah, then instead of realizing your objective, you work. I mean, you work against yourself. Remember, you only tax an economy that is productive. You only tax an economy that is growing. An economy that is in recession, in however much that you want to tax them, you might not realize that those revenues in terms of taxes. So to me, I think that is not a well thought out proposal. Any taxes that has to be levied in the economy must go through Parliament, because Parliament is the representative of the people, and it's the people that you're proposing to tax. Elijah.
George, as we come close to just what the government could have done now in their final document, that's 2021 and 2022, George, there's this proposal that the best way for the government, or the best way out for the government to deliver on their projects, number one, is through PPPs, yes, fighting corruption and reducing on that borrowing. George, they have done neither of that. And if you look at exactly how this document is really taken down, why didn't they not do that? What is this setback that the government is actually facing right now?
Elijah, I want to put it this way.
Yes.
And this might not be very popular with government. But as it is today, I think government must take those drastic measures that will not be very popular, but they will have to do it nonetheless.
Yes.
One is that government might want to consider retrenchment in the public sector, Elijah. That is one proposal that I think government sooner or later will have to do, because that is the only way you reduce your wage bill.
Yes.
The last time we had retrenchment, I think, was in late 90s or early 2000s. And that was we had reached a point where that's the only thing that we had to do. So those are some of the things that government must do. Government must start thinking on reducing their recurrent expenditures, and that is something that they must think through. If you are locating almost 60-70% of your budget on recurrent expenditures, of course, there's a problem, Elijah.
Yes.
And you must start addressing that. And that must be addressed by both the national government and the county governments, because what the national government is doing at the top is the same thing that county governments are doing at the level 2 of our governments. So that is something that they must start addressing. Number 2, Elijah, that I think the government must start addressing is to see ways and means of reducing our debt, our debt portfolio. And what I was talking about budget consolidation is that when you propose to raise, say, 2.03 trillion, a bigger percentage of that must go into financing our debt, so that we bring our debts to manageable level, so that on a year-on-year basis, what goes into debt financing is less than 20%. You can allocate another 40% probably on another 40% on recurrent, and then another 40% development. With that, you can be able to sustain your economy. And then number 3 is just to ensure that our private sector is working. If our private sector is productive and our private sector is working, then it's easier for KRA to collect its taxes and finance government budget. But without that, Elijah, then the ecosystem we are operating in will not support our budget estimates. It will not support our projected revenue collections at the end of the day. Just as I said, you only tax people who are working. You only tax companies that are profitable. You cannot tax an economy that is on a depression, Elijah.
Pretty much, George. I mean, with that discussion, we come to the end of Business AM this morning. Thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us here on exactly what the government's options are 2021 and 2022, and really focusing on what they need to do now more than ever just to deliver on that promise on the Big Four agenda. Thank you very much, George, for taking your time this morning.
Thank you, Elijah.
All right, on that note, we come to the end of Business AM. You can take him back to the time that he came to the studio at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. And once you get there on YouTube, We appreciate a subscription. Thank you very much. Good morning.